Escape attempts and punishments. True stories from women who tried to run. Subscribe for more real crime stories. Like, share, and join the discussion below. The sirens cut through the night like a knife, loud, shrill, and echoing across the concrete walls of the Central Oklahoma Women's Correctional Facility. Red lights flashed against the fences, bouncing off the razor wire that shimmered under the moonlight. Guards sprinted across the yard shouting, "Count! Count now!" It was chaos. Moments earlier, two inmates, Sarah Holt and Jessica Lane, had disappeared from their dorm during a shift change. They'd been gone only minutes before the alarm went off, but in prison, minutes could mean miles. As searchlights swept the yard, a guard found a sheet tied to the window bars, ripped, knotted, and hanging down the side of the building. Sarah and Jessica had jumped. The control room radios exploded with orders. Lock it down. East Wing, perimeter check. Dogs were released, their sharp barks slicing through the dark air. From her office, Warden Carol Vance stared at the cameras in disbelief. Two women really thought they could make it out, she whispered. But deep down, she wasn't surprised. She knew how broken things had become inside those walls, how desperate some of these women felt. By 2 a.m., the search team found muddy footprints near the outer fence. Someone had tried to dig beneath it but got stuck in the thick Oklahoma clay. Then, a guard shouted, "We got movement by the creek." Floodlights turned, illuminating two figures crawling through tall weeds, drenched and gasping. "Don't move. Hands where I can see them," officers yelled, closing in fast. The women froze, exhausted, shaking, their makeshift escape torn apart by mud and fear. Sarah whispered to Jessica, "We almost made it, we almost," before both were tackled to the ground. As they were dragged back through the gates, their orange uniforms stained and ripped, the rest of the prison watched silently from cell windows. Some cheered quietly, others just stared. It wasn't courage or rebellion that drove the attempt. It was something else entirely. Hopelessness. Inside the warden's office, the paperwork began: escape reports, disciplinary forms, and punishment orders. The words on the page were cold, procedural. Inmates Holt and Lane. Attempted escape. To be placed in segregation pending investigation. But what no one in that office saw were the bruises beneath Sarah's sleeves or the letters Jessica had hidden under her mattress, letters begging the court for help, saying she feared for her life after a violent incident with another inmate. Now, as both women sat handcuffed in a cold, windowless room awaiting solitary confinement, their eyes met in silence. Sarah's lip trembled as she whispered, "Do you think anyone will ever listen?" Jessica didn't answer. The sound of the steel door slamming shut was her reply. Outside, Warden Vance watched the dawn rise over the prison yard. The lights dimmed, the alarm stopped, and order returned. But that night would haunt her, because she knew this wasn't just an escape attempt. It was a cry for help, and it was only the beginning. The next morning, the prison was eerily quiet. Breakfast trays slid under doors without a word. The usual chatter from the yard was gone. Everyone was waiting to see what would happen to Sarah Holt and Jessica Lane. Inside solitary confinement, the two women sat in separate gray cells, their only connection being the faint echo of footsteps and metal doors closing down the corridor. Sarah stared at the cracked wall, her eyes swollen from lack of sleep. She kept replaying the moment they were caught. The barking dogs, the mud, the spotlight, all of it looping in her mind like a bad dream. She hadn't wanted to run at first. She just wanted someone to listen. But when Jessica whispered, "We don't have to stay here. We can go," something inside her snapped. In another cell, Jessica was pacing. She had been in prison for 3 years for a nonviolent drug offense, her first crime, a mistake she'd paid for over and over. But this place, she said, wasn't correction, it was corrosion. The overcrowded dorms, the fights, the nights when guards ignored screams for help, all of it pushed her to the edge. Back in the warden's office, Carol Vance was under pressure. Reporters had already called, asking how two women almost made it out of a maximum security unit. The Department of Corrections demanded an explanation. "We can't afford another scandal," said a state official on the phone. Handle it quietly. But Carol couldn't shake the feeling that something deeper was wrong. That afternoon, she walked down to segregation. As she passed each door, inmates called out, some mocking, others pleading. When she reached Sarah's cell, she stopped. "Why'd you do it?" she asked. Sarah didn't look up. "You wouldn't believe me if I told you." "Try me," Carol said. Sarah hesitated, then whispered, "I asked for help. For months. They ignored me. They told me to stop making trouble. So I ran." Carol's face tightened. She wanted to say something, to explain, to justify, but no words came. She left without replying, but Sarah's voice followed her down the hall. "We weren't escaping the prison. We were escaping what happens inside it." That night, Warden Vance sat alone in her office reviewing the files. Both women had written multiple complaints, all marked unsubstantiated. One letter even warned of harassment from a correctional officer. The papers felt heavy in her hands. She'd been in this system for 20 years, and for the first time, she wasn't sure she believed in it anymore. The next day, punishment was announced. Both women would serve 30 days in solitary confinement and face additional charges that could add 5 more years to their sentences. The announcement hit the entire prison like a wave. Silence, then murmurs, then anger. From inside her cell, Jessica shouted, "30 days for trying to live." Her voice carried down the hallway. That night, the guards patrolled in pairs. Tension filled the air like electricity before a storm. Then, near midnight, a sound broke the silence, a loud bang from the end of the segregation wing. A guard shouted, "Cell 9, we've got a situation." The lights flickered, alarms blared again, and chaos began to rise. Whatever had happened inside Cell 9 wasn't part of any escape plan this time, but it was about to shake the prison far worse than 2 women running into the dark ever could. The alarm echoed through the concrete halls again, but this time it wasn't for an escape. It was something worse. Guards rushed to Cell 9, flashlights cutting through the darkness. When they reached the door, they saw Jessica Lane lying on the floor, pale and unresponsive. Her knuckles were bruised from pounding the steel door, and next to her was a torn piece of her uniform, tied tightly around her wrist. "Get medical." Now, one guard yelled. Another fumbled with the keys, finally unlocking the cell. Within minutes, nurses were there, voices overlapping. "Pulse." "She's breathing, barely." They lifted her onto a stretcher, the metallic wheels screeching down the hall as officers cleared the way. Sarah, in the next cell over, was screaming. "What happened to her? Tell me what's going on." Her voice cracked, but no one answered. The only sound left was the distant echo of the stretcher rolling away. Hours later, the prison was in lockdown again. The official report said Jessica had suffered a severe panic attack and self-harm attempt brought on by isolation. She survived, but barely. The warden's heart sank when she read the report. It was exactly what she'd feared. The punishment meant to maintain control had nearly cost a woman her life. When Jessica regained consciousness 2 days later in the infirmary, she refused to speak. Her eyes were empty, her spirit broken. Warden Vance visited her quietly, pulling up a chair beside her bed. "You shouldn't have had to go through that," she said softly. "But I need you to help me understand why." Jessica's voice was weak. "We're not monsters, Warden. We just want it out. Out of the noise, the fear, the nights that never end. You say this place is about correction, but it just breaks people down until there's nothing left to fix." Those words haunted Vance. When she walked back through the yard later that day, she saw the same hopeless faces looking back at her, women waiting for letters, for visits that might never come, for a chance that always felt out of reach. A week later, the state inspectors arrived. The warden had filed a confidential report, the first honest one she'd ever written. It documented years of ignored complaints, overcrowded cells, and failures in the rehabilitation system. It included Sarah and Jessica's case as proof of what happens when reform is just a word on paper. The findings shocked the Department of Corrections. Within months, several staff were removed and an internal review began. But real change came slowly. By the time the public heard about it, the story had already faded beneath other headlines. Sarah eventually finished her sentence. She was released with a small duffel bag and a stack of paperwork, but no counseling, no job, no place to go. She took a deep breath as she stepped outside the gates, the Oklahoma sun glaring down on her face. Jessica wasn't as lucky. Her added time from the escape attempt meant she would remain behind bars for years. Still, she wrote letters to lawmakers, to journalists, to anyone who might listen. Her words were clear, raw, and painfully real. I ran once because I wanted to live. I'm still here because no one asked why. Back in her office, Warden Carol Vance kept that letter pinned to her bulletin board. Every morning, she read it before starting her day, a reminder of the truth behind the walls she was supposed to manage. Because in the end, the story of Sarah and Jessica wasn't about crime or punishment. It was about the system itself, a system that called itself correctional, but too often forgot to correct anything at all. And though the alarms had gone quiet, the echoes of that night, the sirens, the screams, the desperate pounding on steel, would never really fade.